I've always gotten a lot of credit from Matt and Philip and Jason playing throughout the years and back in Revolver. But there's a lot of songs on the 38th Street and Imaginary Joe that they really deserve a lot of credit. The Pocket being Matt and Jason was just fantastic. Stuff on the 38th Street album, songs like Something's Wrong. Some of the stuff that Matt did at the end of the song, and Jason following and changing up the beat and kind of a swing feel was just really brilliant. Something I would have never thought of doing, and very unique. And Matt gets all the credit for that, playing that walking line and doing that. Songs like Candace's song, Matt's bass playing. Very unique. Jason's drumming, very unique. And these guys could have easily come in and just played root notes and played straight beats on these songs, but some of the things that they added, in my opinion, really made those songs. Your Love Song, the bass hook that Matt's playing, just incredible. Really makes the song stand out. And anyway, I just feel like those guys didn't get enough credit. And Philip too on even his rhythm playing on some of the songs, some of the little hooks and things that he would put in songs that really made him stand out and made him unique.
The Vaunted Amanda song that everybody loved.
Great songwriter. I mean, because we started off with Amanda, which is that song really hit me first because that was the first one we worked on. Loved the chord progression, and the chord progression in that song was world class to me because it was great.
Best song I think on the entire album was actually called Amanda.
So it starts off with Amanda, and that was one of the first songs I ever wrote.
And I'm assuming, I think Amanda might have been our first song that we might have cut.
So that was kind of the hit song there, and
it was a love song, which that was pretty much the genre that I started off with because, for one thing, it was the easiest, just a simple format to start out in. And, I started sort of acoustic, open chord type stuff, and it's all just fits that way. And I don't remember exactly what order my first songs were, but I know vaguely that Amanda and Your Love Song, which is track number 6, those were kind of the first ones I ever wrote. Also, right in there with that would be track number 7, Something's Wrong. That was one of the first ones I ever wrote, and that's on the footage from Joe's house. So we were working on that early before we ever even had a drummer. Then Tears in the Rain was an early one.
Amanda was one of my first favorite songs that Philip did. I really liked it. It's like, wow, this song sounds really cool. So I really liked Amanda.
So that first album, Amanda's probably the best song on there. That was a crowd favorite. People would stop by, they'd love it, and they'd want to hear it. Kind of a sappy love song, but it was a great song. It really was a great song. Great chords, good melody, good words, and to this day, I think we all think that could be a hit song. Really could have, especially then, and even probably still now. Might be a country hit, but it definitely is a quality song.
I went back and put some licks, those little, for Amanda. That little riff, so to speak, without the vocals, those were going to be just my first take basic track with the bass and drums, everybody together, doing that live. And, in recording, you got to go back and overdub a lot of things to make it better, absolutely best. So I did that, and I used Joe's guitars for that too. I used his 12-string Rickenbacker to do that lick for Amanda. And then for the second time around, on that same little bit on later in the song, I got a little carried away and then used his Fender and distorted it. And I wish I just stuck to the 12 string for both of those. That would have been better. 12 string sound was best for that. Sounded really good. So I overdubbed that. And then there was a few little overdubs. Joe, of course, he'll know way more than me, but he overdubbed a few solos, but not much.
Jason and Matt were in the room trying to do some backups to it, and it was taking quite a while, pretty lengthy. And of course, we were on the clock, and time's money. I remember telling Philip in the control room, "Hey, you might need to go in there and just sing these parts and do what they're trying to do, because it was taking quite a while." And
Jason and Matt went up to the mic first time ever, and they're trying to do these harmonies, and they were struggling. And I kind of wanted to replace them on that because I knew I could do it, but I also didn't really want to do my own backups. I kind of thought, well, they should do it, but they were struggling. And Joe came up to me and sort of like, "You should take over." Like he had confidence in my vocals, and so did I, but not necessarily in that setting.
I'll never forget this. So we're sitting there in the studio, and it's me and Matt doing backup vocals to one of the songs. And I'll never forget this. I started laughing so hard. Oh, it was Amanda. We're going, ah. And Matt was chewing gum. He's like, right before he gets to singing, he'd be sitting there with his headphones in. I was sitting there looking at him. We're up against the condenser mic. And Matt's sitting there just right before he'd start singing, he'd start chewing that gum. And I was just laughing. We had to do at least 4 takes. I'll never forget that. That was so funny.
And it was nothing against them. It's just, you got to understand, up until that point, Jason and Matt haven't really been doing any vocals. Philip had been taking all the reps, so to speak. So it kind of makes sense that they were struggling a bit.
But they were really struggling, and we went ahead and kept it. They finally got a little bit better and kept their best deal, and then we just sort of tried to mix it down and try to make a Wilbury out of it.
And I want to say that was a part that I asked if I could put that in there because I thought it would sound cool at the end. Or maybe we both discussed it, I can't remember, but yeah.
stories been told. My love for you will still be true long after time itself is through. Hey, Amanda, you don't even know how beautiful you are. And Amanda, I will let you know how beautiful you are. Hey, Amanda, with the long blonde hair and the big blue eyes, like the sunlight shining up above from a clear blue sky. Hey, Amanda, hey, Amanda, hey, Amanda.
Philip was doing this little intro, arpeggiating the chords. And so on. So, and I had just learned how to play harmonics. Since we were all just starting out on our instruments, these were just a natural harmonics that I put on the intro in this position. And I played an arpeggio with harmonics over that chord progression. Not much, but at the time that meant a lot to me. Later on, before we actually recorded this song, I came up with one little lick that we did because we practiced constantly before we went in the studio. The reason why we were able to do a lot of these songs in one take. But I came up with this little lick, which was nothing special. And even later on in the song during the solo, I try to just kind of play off the melody. So like the first part of the solo. That's playing on the melody of the song. So anyway, in those days, you didn't have much to go on since we hadn't played long and hadn't played together much either. So everything was exciting and everything was new. And if you came up with anything that worked, you were pretty happy that you accomplished that.
So the bridge, maybe I don't know if it's my favorite part, but something I really like is that little bridge that goes into the minors. Because, the verse, it's a nice little progression and everybody loved it, but it's not the most revolutionary thing. You just have a G, B minor, A minor, C, and D. It goes nicely together, but it's not anything out of the ordinary. But then you go into that verse, and then you've got a C minor, G, and then D minor, A.
An interesting part of Amanda, I remember we recorded the CD, a co-worker of ours at Sutherland, Shane Coker, he got a copy of the CD. He kind of liked it. He said it was good. He's one of the guys that hung around early on in the tax office. But there was this story that I remember him telling, at least me and Philip, but his dad was a bass player. So some kind of award-winning bass player. Really kind of sounds like a Fish story when you're older, but at the time it seemed legit. And he said, the bass is, he's playing a wrong chord on the bass. Well, 20 years later, at the time it kind of bothered me, and I even kind of thought later on, a few years after Revolver, what if I reworked that? What if that wasn't right? But then later I'm like, you know what? Totally musically correct. It's just a scale. It's just Anyway, what he was talking about is the chord is G, and then it goes to a B minor, but my bass line was descending, so it actually went to an F sharp note, F sharp, but that's relative to B, or B minor as the chord would be. But anyway, so the bass line went. Anyway, there's your G, and then walk down to what is an F sharp or F sharp minor, while the guitar player's playing B minor, but it's part of the scale. It works. So I'm like, yeah, what a crock. He also had some criticism that I played lead bass. I don't know about that on Amanda. This was just almost like a country bass. But weird deal. It's strange to get criticized like that when you're a beginner. You've just started playing, and you're a brand new band. You're 19 years old, maybe 20, and then you get some of that criticism. That was a little weird.
And then the little lick, of course. And I played that, even though I had Joe. I tended to hog some of these bits when I had such a great player next to me. But then in the lick, it mimics those other phrases, but then it changes from A or G to A instead of C to D. Because normally you would resolve that G, B minor, A minor, you'd resolve it with a C and a D, but the lick resolved with G and A. So a nice little switch there.
And a little phrase on Amanda that Philip came up with that just fit perfectly on this guitar. And I would have played it in the studio and it would have sounded something like this.
The chords to Amanda was the oh man, that song, I think that was the first song we rehearsed. That song right there was like, wow, you know. And then when I started figuring out the drum parts, that song was magical to me, even to this day. It was like, because it was like, it's such a great song. I mean, you know, the chord structure, the melody, everything. So it was definitely that.
Hey, Amanda, you need to know how beautiful you are. And Amanda, I will let you know how beautiful you are. Hey, Amanda, with the long blonde hair and the big blue eyes, like the sunlight shining up above from the blue skies.
Tears in the Rain, that's another one, capoed on the first or second fret. And really good sound, slightly soft on the lyrics, you know, a little bit light on the lyrics. But nice little sound. Joe had some runs and some leads, you know, a lead solo and some runs throughout that were good, and vocals could have been stronger.
Tears in the Rain. It's another fun one to write to, and had kind of a walking part, so fun to play. This was another one that it was so early on, I had no idea what key this was in.
Tears in the Rain was kind of a cheesy title, but you know, just you're starting off writing and you do the best you can, and somebody said that one time, some girl that I think we went to school with, because I think Joe might have still been in high school when we first kicked off Revolver, and there was a girl that heard about, you know, some of that stuff and heard the title, Tears in the Rain, and said, oh, that sounds corny. And I was a little bit, you know, offended or kind of, and then, you know, you look back and you're like, yeah, she was right. It's a little bit cheesy, but, you know, it's some of the lines talk about, you know, her tears in the rain so you can't see, and you know, you're trying to be a little bit poetic and interesting that way. Not the deepest stuff, but at the same time, it was really, that song was more about the tempo and the chords, and it might have been the first song that I'd ever written with a capo, because I capoed up to, I think it was the 2nd fret, and just had a jangly, upbeat, but with Joe's lead, it's not all that jangly. I mean, the rhythm is, but Joe's leads fatten it up, and, you know, it was an upbeat number with a little minor change to it, a little minor chord in there, and it was fun. And
one of the songs I remember us doing multiple takes on, at least for the intro, was called Tears in the Rain. And that's because of the way the layout was of the studio. The sound loft had a big open room, and then it had a side room where the drums were. So Jace was in the side room, and we just had headphones on to hear, and you couldn't see him. So I could see Matt and Philip, but I couldn't see Jason at all. So getting the timing down on the intro to that song was pretty challenging, and I remember us doing it a couple times after we'd already run through the song just to get the intro right. But the intro went something like this. I just had a couple power chords.
This was Tears in the Rain. I think I've said it was capoed on the 2nd fret and some other clips, but capoed 4th fret. Intro, I would play open, and Joe would play power chords to match those chords, which sounded fatter and better, more rock and roll. But it was a good mix.
And in between those chords, Jason would do some drum rolls. And that's what made it difficult to even stay in time after you already started the song. So pretty challenging to get that intro, but we got it.
To that intro sequence, Jason would do drum rolls. Come back in with this little part was pretty much the hook of the song. I felt was this little minor chord, major chord, but that just nice little. That was sort of the basis of the whole song right there.
Say
I remember a little bit of drama with the song called Blue Sun on the first album. Interesting song. It was pretty unique. But it was kind of a co-write. It was Jason Riley and Philip. But there was a little bit of strife on that one, and it's really funny looking back.
I just couldn't do the bridge, and was stuck on it. And I'm trying to figure out what chords to put in the bridge and exactly what to say or do. And Philip decided to help me out with it. And I thought, oh, okay.
You know, he came up with the concept, Blue Sun, the title, the chords, and all of that, but he got stuck. And he had that tendency, he would start a song and then he wouldn't finish it.
He needed a bridge, and he needed more lyrics. So, I mean, it had to happen, but, you know, being young, there was a lot of friction and headbutting along the way.
Blue Sun, I wrote this bridge, and so I'm singing it. It was just a natural thing. We didn't give it a second thought. It's just, okay, I'm singing this, and oh, it's cool that Jason starts, and then Philip comes in, and then Jason, and so we just went with that, and everybody kind of went with it and liked it.
We went to the bridge, and Philip sings it, and Jason was kind of, why has he got to sing? It's my song. Well, I mean, he wrote that part, and I thought it was kind of cool to have alternating lead vocals, and that is neat.
But I wrote that, and so I sang it. And being, 19, and, that was the mindset, especially for me, but really for all of us, but me in particular, because, hey, I wrote this, so I'll sing. And we all kind of like the idea of, the dueling vocals and two vocals. I've said this a lot, but, most of my favorite bands have two frontmen, two lead singers, and that sort of thing. Obvious one being the Beatles. You've got Paul McCartney and John Lennon. These, and then Pink Floyd. You've got David Gilmour and Roger Waters. Both of those guys are the lead singer, and they alternate in different songs, different times. So a lot of times, Waters and Gilmour are in the same song, trading off. And then, of course, you have the Eagles. You've got Don Henley and Glenn Frey. Those guys, and they sing in the same song, kind of dueling vocals numerous times.
Well, little did I know, this guy was going to be like, all right, well, I wrote this part, I'm going to sing it. I'm like, Philip, you sing 7 songs on this, why can't I do it? Because I wrote that part and I should be able to sing it. And I'm like, this is crap, and we got in a huge fight.
So this is the guitar that Jason would have been using on Blue Sun. It's a Washburn, and I had it at the studio that night, and Jason played this guitar, and this guitar popped up on a few other songs. Something's Wrong. I know Philip played it on that. So once again, I kind of feel like Jason was listening to a lot of Jim Croce. Matter of fact, I know he was, because all the hours I spent riding around with him in his pickup. But he had a finger picking arrangement that he was playing on the beginning of this tune. He actually played it throughout the song, and I'm not really sure on the pattern, but he was doing something like, and Philip was playing his Rickenbacker and playing these chords, playing rhythm throughout, and it really sounded almost like a piano. It was such a cool sound. No drums on this song. You don't miss it. But Philip would have been doing...
by then, we had already either decided to go to the studio, the sound loft, as it was called, or we had already started going and recording things, and he had already had the, I forget exactly, but there was somehow or another, there was a little bit of pressure, and we needed to finish this thing, and we kind of realized it wasn't going to happen, so I decided to finish it, take it upon myself to help him out. And I came up with a bridge, like a C sharp minor, change, a slight key change, but it still fit within the structure and everything. But it was a little bit lengthy, but not too long if it was just one bridge. We made the mistake of doubling the bridge, though.
I think had it been worked a little bit differently, to where it wasn't so much of, one guy taking up the middle so much, that could have been reworked better. But other than that, I mean, he needed it.
Because what we did is we made the bridge and went back to Jason's chords, and Joe soloed over it, a melodic, beautiful little solo, and then we went back to the bridge and then finished it up with those verses. And really, there wasn't a true chorus to that song. It was pretty much Jason's verses, which were really good, and then my bridge, and that was about it, just a two-part kind of deal. But we had verses, bridge, solo, bridge, verses to play on out. But since it was sort of a lengthy bridge, the fact that we sandwiched it around the solo, that was a mistake. We should have worked it out somehow, to where it was just one bridge.
But the mistake, we go with the bridge, and then you go into the lead solo, and then it comes back to the bridge, and so there it is, Philip again. It's just like Jason was, like this huge chunk in the middle of my song. It's all him singing. So we could have done that differently.
So I used this guitar on the song Blue Sun on the chord progression that Philip came up with that you might call a bridge or maybe a chorus, and it sounded something like this.
It was like, well, let's get this on here and let's get Jason a song, and it's a great song, and so we had to finish it. So I came up with the different and distinct part, but fit right in, with the rest of the song. And so, of course, just being how things were and how we were, it was like, I'm singing this part, and I didn't really give him a choice. For one thing, I knew the words and nobody else, so that was one thing. And then the other thing was I really thought Don Henley, Glenn Frey, like one of my favorite Eagle songs is, there's so many, but After the Thrill Is Gone, I think, is one of the ones where it's like Glenn Frey is doing the verses and everything, and then Don Henley comes in for the chorus bridge thing, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. So it's like you got Jason singing, then I'm going to come in with my part that I wrote. So the bridge part was So then it just fits in with the rest of the mournful song, the mournful chords and the somber, mournful, melancholy lyrics. It was just a good combination. Good teamwork.
Jason came up with the chords, and so he was kind of toying around with that chord progression, how it begins, and the idea of Blue Sun, and so it was real mellow, it was unique. It was cool chord progression, and so anyway, but he didn't have enough, and so he really needed, credit to him, it was a good concept and everything, but he really needed help. He wasn't going to finish it, and he didn't have enough for a song. So Philip, offers to step in and clean it up or finish it up. Not clean, but finish it. So he wrote a bridge, and it goes to minor chords, and it was good, but there was fighting. It's.
And what we didn't realize at the time was then, so from that point, kind of a long bridge, then solo, then that, kind of a long bridge again, and then there's a space of at least 2 minutes or more, probably more than 2 minutes, where Jason's not singing. And so that was sort of a little structural mistake there. And looking back, we could have just put one bridge and then solo and kind of go back to that. But because of that, Jason kind of got a little dissatisfied with that. He kind of grumbled, at the tax office. And I can totally see that. And on this CD, I've got 7 songs and he's got 1, and it's his one song. And so he's sort of like, hey, I want to sing this.
You have 7 songs on there, and it's like, I don't understand what the big deal was. And, we got in a huge fight. Joe had to come in and mediate. I'm like, you know what, whatever. This is crap. Okay, fine. You want that part, then go ahead. And I was pretty upset for a long time over that. Because, it's one thing to have, 7 songs or whatever, or have a song where you do stuff, and if I had a lot of songs on there too, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But it was like, man, I had one song to showcase what I could do, and it's like.
But the trouble was, we got to the studio, and he pulled a last minute deal. We get right in there, and this was by the hour, $30 an hour, and it's as soon as you walk in the door, you set your stuff down, tune up, plug in, set up. You're on the clock, and we're there, and we're on the clock. And then he, last minute, I'm gonna sing it. I want to sing that part. What? We're all like, what? No, because you don't rehearse in the studio. You got to rehearse at your place, somewhere else outside this, and you got to be ready to roll when you get in the studio. So he's pulling the rug out on us and saying, I want to sing this bridge. And we're like, no way, especially me. I'm like, no way. Can't do that. You'll have to be, like, you don't know the words. We'll have to write them down. We're on the clock. And then you'll have to go through several takes to kind of get it right, because you haven't done this. You're not singing it. And
one of the problems that we ran into in the studio with the song Blue Sun is Jason decided that he was going to sing the entire song. And I remember arguing the fact that we hadn't rehearsed it that way. We had been practicing for probably weeks before we went in. And we've always done it the same, with Philip singing the chorus, or maybe you might call it a bridge, that he had written for the song. And I remember Jason wanting to try to step in and sing the whole song. And Philip and Jason were going back and forth on this in the studio. And it was probably quite awkward for Happy and Greg.
Yeah, it was at the Sound Loft where we had our, I want to say it was right outside the door or something, out in front, or in the, I can't remember. But yeah, we got in a huge argument, and I think I drove off. I got so pissed I drove off. I think I drove to the gas station, if I remember. I mean, I was mad. Like, I stayed in the truck or something. I'm like, well, I didn't even stay in there when you recorded that. At first, I kind of thought, oh man, you know, maybe he'll be like, all right, dude, you can do it. But no. I mean, that was, you know, Philip was just really high strung back in those days.
You're going to have to practice this in the studio on the clock, and, you know, this whole bit. And no, we're not doing that. And I even said, okay, look, you can sing the whole song. I'll give you the whole song. You can sing that live from now on. But right here in the studio, you can't change, last minute change. We have to do it the way we do it. And he was mad, and I was getting kind of mad, and it was a really big clash. It sort of felt like that was something, an impasse that we couldn't get through. We somehow did. Joe and Matt somehow calmed us down, and we moved past that, and I went ahead and recorded it. But it was a sore spot for a number of years. He was kind of bitter about that.
I was trying to come in and referee the thing and say, hey, we need to actually play it the way we've been practicing it. Because we just don't have time to try new things, especially in the studio when you've never done it before.
And looking back on that, I totally understand, because, you know, as time goes by and you mellow and things like that, you look and, well, you know, that was his one song on the album, and he wanted to, you know, get to sing it probably all the way through, and you know, and here I am like, no, because I wrote it. And plus, but more than anything, it was the last minute deal. Like, you know, he should have pushed for that a lot sooner, while we could still rehearse him singing it. But and even then, there's no guarantee. I might have still been stubborn and said, no, that's my part. But you know, the last minute deal really killed it. There was no chance. You know, if he had tried it sooner, he would have had a slightly better chance of singing that part. But so that was a real tense thing, a real point of tension for a long time.
When we got in that huge fight, I said it was the Philip show. It doesn't matter what anybody else wants. It's all about what Philip wants. So, oh man, Philip's going to write a chorus to your song. Well, guess what? He's going to sing it on your album, on your song. It doesn't matter, because that's what he wants. He didn't care. He was out to just prove that he could do what he wanted to, and he didn't care about anybody else's feelings.
And he'd play several George Strait songs when he got bored of being on the drums, and he'd want to get out and give me that guitar and show off. I can play acoustic guitar too. And I'm like, oh wow. And you know, we thought, on the one hand, we felt like, yeah, that's pretty cool that he can play. He knew chords and he could do finger picking, and so we thought that was cool that he could do that. But on the other side of the coin, it was a little bit annoying, because it was sort of like, hey, great, you can play guitar, but get back on the drums. That's what you're best at, and that's what we need you at. We got a couple guitar players here, we got one drummer. Come on. But it was still cool though, even though there was a little bit of like, okay, drums. So he's doing that, and he liked to kind of show off, move out front and do that. But he'd play these George Strait songs, and he'd start off great. Then he had the country, you know, he's got the Texas accent to begin with, and then he'd had the twang, and he knew how to do his country, and he had the chords down and stuff. But then he'd get 2 or 3 verses in, usually a verse and a chorus, and then he'd stop. Oh yeah, there's this other one, and he'd jump into another George Strait song. So we kind of look at each other, okay, all right. And then he's like, or a Keith Whitley, and he starts playing a Keith Whitley song, and you know, like, don't close your eyes, and they're, oh, hey, that sounds pretty good too. Drummer, not bad, really good for a drummer, and all that kind of stuff. And then, you know, roughly halfway, a third in, halfway in, stop. Oh yeah, there's this George Strait, and he'd go back to another song. So he was just always, it was like he had this hyperactive energy, and he would jump from song to song, and we began to notice pretty quickly doesn't finish these songs. And so such was the case with Blue Sun. He didn't finish it, but he had this great idea and title and this great little chord progression and melody and all the basics were there. He laid the foundation for that, but it wasn't finished.
But it was a unique song, pretty neat, I think. And Joe's lead work, of course, was great. A lot of neat sounding stuff, cool leads, and of course the bass was interesting. I had fun playing that, coming up with that part. Like I said, that's what we did well. Somebody had something. It was always fun to come up with something, but I thought it was a kind of different, interesting bass.
Several years later, sometimes that would resurface in little, arguments or whatever. And, but that's just how we looked at it. It was like if somebody wrote it, they put it, and on our credits that we have, for what it's worth, it was listed as Jason Riley / Philip Harrell, because that's just how we did things. It's like, hey, I wrote this and I'm on there. And that probably bugged him a little bit too, but especially the vocal part. And I see his point completely, but that's just how it went down.
Like I said, it's the concept of going back, and Jason would later do that with John Belcher on the second album with the Lost in a Memory, I think is what they called it, Standing Outside.
But I filled in a lot of the blanks on even those verses, so percentage-wise, I wrote a lot of that song, and but it's still, I always say this, Blue Sun is Jason's song through and through. It's because, he came up with it. He gave birth to the song and to the idea. He comes up with the chords, he capos it, interesting chords, interesting melody, Blue Sun, title, when that blue sun is shining down on you. He came up with that. I'm not sure how much else he came up with, but that's enough, because if he hadn't done that, nobody would have written Blue Sun, and I wouldn't have written it, and nobody else would have written it. So it's totally his. In that sense, it's his song, there's no question about it, but he had a lot of assistance. But that was part of who Jason was and is. He collaborates. He's a collaborator, and he likes to work in tandem and team up with guys like John Belcher later on. And he and I wrote a little song, a couple years later, Second Best, something like that. I forget what we called it, but and then Matt, and he kind of, how did it go? It was, when I'm walking hand in hand in my dreams, everything is easier, it seems. Matt may have written most of that, but somehow they kind of worked together for that. But John and Jason worked with his couple of his buddies to
I remember I had to sing it over again. They actually took the two vocals that I sang, because I sang it really weird. I sang Blue Sun really weird on the verses, that actually took my second take and overdubbed it to where it was almost like a harmony part.
Yeah, they
doubled the
two take vocals, doubled them together.
And
they were so proud of themselves for that.
We kind of seemed like a gay couple, Philip, though. I mean, when you really look back on it, think about
Happy and Greg, they might have been gay.
Another song on here, the fourth song, Candace's song, not the best one on the album, but sort of a little interesting bit about it was, we had a buddy we worked with, Cody Reynolds, a little bit younger than us, and he was a hot-headed, he's a funny guy, but he was pretty intense, and he was dating Candace, but Candace came out and was one of our fans and was watching the band before she got together with Cody. So she liked our band and came out and watched and everything, and Cody was dating like this hot little Asian girl, and he broke up with her and got with Candace for some reason. I mean, it was, you know, Candace was, guys liked Candace, but it was almost like a political move. May have to cut this. And then, anyway, so he's dating Candace, and then he commissioned me to write a song for her. And so I said, sure, why not? You know, you're 19, why not? And he was probably 18 or, yeah, I mean, barely 18. And I don't recall how old she was. She was at least as old as us, maybe a year older or something. But so I write this song, and the funny thing is, I really already had these lyrics. I was already in progress, and so I basically just slapped her name on the song, and I wasn't writing anything about her. I just kind of didn't have a title for the song I got going, and then, okay, well, might as well be Candace's song. And so the lyrics actually don't have anything to do with Candace, but I do that, and then it's like, okay, Cody, here it is, and it's kind of a love song. But I assure you, I never wrote a love song about Candace, but
on our first album, Philip had a song called Candace's Song, and it had an interesting chord progression. It went from a C sharp minor to an E minor on the verses, and I always thought that was an odd progression.
and then you just have this sort of rhythm where you drop to E minor. Unique sound, cool chords. I wish I could come up with this stuff now. But Joe liked it. He always said that's a really strange place to go, you know, to E minor. Okay.
Candace's song. It was really fun to play. It was really fun to write a part to because it was so weird, you know. Weird chords, unusual chords, and the lyrics were complex, and so it was interesting and sounded something like this.
So you just sort of sit and wait by starlit sky, serene anticipation. The stars above the clear mind love, silent proclamation. So that was the verses went on like that. Really sappy, heavy, poetic lyrics, and then there's a change that's sort of different. Doesn't have much to do with the rest of the song, but I just kind of worked it in there. But it's a lot of dun 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 dun, key, almost a key change, subtle key change, and it's interesting in terms of, you know, you try to write a song now, and then you look back at that and the complication of putting in those chords.
Different timing, tempo changes and stuff too, so it was really unique. Very, especially when you think 19, 20-year-old, pretty advanced.
And then it went and that, I mean, that's a nifty little bridge, and again, I wish I could come up with that stuff now, but can you stop the earth, change the season? kind of tough to get through.
Relentlessly pursuing.
In the verse is all that heavy, sappy, poetic stuff. I haven't told a lot of people this, but where that came from and how that started was I actually had Led Zeppelin kind of playing in my head, and I think it might have been Kashmir, and you would never know from comparing the two songs. They don't compare, and it doesn't seem like it, but sometimes that's how it works, because it was the meter, the beat and the meter pattern is kind of going in my head, and then I make up my own lyrics. And I was at work and I took out a notepad and started writing out this heavy, sappy poetry. But part of that aura and heavy, drippy stuff sort of emanated from Kashmir. I mean, you got the meter and the beat going in your head, and then you're writing these lyrics, and you kind of have the Robert Plant feel, even though it just doesn't sound like it. Like, well, that doesn't sound like Robert Plant lyrics, and it's not, but that's sort of where it comes from. And so that's sort of why, part of why I let myself get away with those lyrics is because it was in the spirit, at least to me, in the spirit of it in my head. And then you go on with that stuff, and anyway, yeah, it's kind of funny how all that went, and a song about Candace, which had nothing to do with Candace.
Normally I would play some higher stuff on it while he was playing the lower parts. And maybe play some arpeggios through that. I always thought that was an interesting chord progression.
Because the song doesn't sound anything like Kashmir, I mean, obviously, but sometimes you can work that way where it was more of the meter pattern and the rhythm pattern in your head, and I'm coming up with lyrics based off of that. And then some of the you know, those stellar kind of lyrics, you know, stars and the axis, you are the axis of my heart, and caught in your attraction, and, you know, almost outer space sounding things. And I could just hear Robert Plant doing that. It was one of his rare love ballads, and, you know, and almost a mystical sound to the chords and to the lyrics and all that. So that was, I guess, my one little sad attempt at trying to sound like Led Zeppelin. I say that tongue-in-cheek because I wasn't trying to sound like a Led Zeppelin. I just had them in mind when I'm doing that. And sometimes that's how it works. Sometimes you can have something in mind, and then it allows you to kind of create something that comes out sounding nothing at all like what you had in mind, but it works.
One of the few overdubs, I want to say the two guitar solos on Life's Highway. And I'll have to ask Joe, but it seems like those might have been overdub. And, but those were great. Philip had a great solo. Those were good melodic middle solo there. And then Joe's solo was one of my all-time favorites of any solo. I mean, he comes in there at the end with that second solo and just tears it up. Even to this day, I listen to that second solo to end the song. It just, you know, makes you feel excited about life.
And then Life's Highway, of course, Matt's song, number 5, and he was so, he was nervous. The vocals, you can kind of hear it in the vocals because, you know, he had one shot. And like I've said, you're in the studio and it's the first time and you don't have any experience and you're used to playing, and, you know, everyone's playing with you, plus you've got your instrument, you're singing, but then that's gone and you've got the headphones and you're listening that way, and you got people watching you and all that stuff. So when you have no experience, there's a big learning curve, and you really have to adjust to that. And you really have to get used to all of that to try to do a steady vocal. And I had 7 songs, so I got I got semi-comfortable with that. But Matt had won. He had one shot. And, so it didn't turn out as well as it could have, but it was still, a good song, and he would get quite a bit better on the next album.
Life's Highway was my one and only song on our first album, Revolver 38th Street. I remember when I first wrote it and played it for Joe, he said the bass line reminded him of the Blind Melon song, No Rain. But Life's Highway went something like this.
So I remember one of the last songs we recorded at the Sound Loft was Matt's song, Life's Highway. And after we finished the song, Jason came out of the drum room and looked at Greg and Happy and said, "So what do y'all think?" And Greg said, "I dig it, pick and shovel." And Jason didn't really understand what he was getting at, but that was just one of the things that Jason was always great at doing. He loved to try to get a reaction out of somebody and kind of see what they were thinking. And he still does this stuff to this day.
Life's Highway is not necessarily his best, but it was a good song, but it was underdeveloped and underproduced because it was his first, and his first vocal, and being in the studio, he was nervous, and you can tell just no experience and some nerves and things like that. So the vocal's not anywhere near his best, and then some other things. But the early problem with Matt's is the shifting the format. And what I like to do as time would go by on Matt's stuff, I would play leads.
So when we came back into the studio to do our next batch of songs, this time I came back with a Fender Stratocaster. Unfortunately, it's not this one, but this is a Strat that was my main guitar and I played for years. I actually sold that old Strat when I got this one, but anyway, Matt's song, Life's Highway, featured Philip playing leads throughout the song, and he had a solo in it, and then I had a solo in it, and I was playing this rhythm part.
I would jump to lead because, for one thing, Matt, for the most part, he wrote on bass, and he's playing bass, so we're all sitting around, and he goes, "Here's my new song, it goes something like this," and he plays bass and sings into the, guide vocal, and so right away, Joe, who could read notes, he knew the notes on the bass and everything, he'd watch Matt's fingers, and he would then copy it on the chords. And I'm over here kind of, I don't know, where's he at? And so, I couldn't immediately translate the way Joe could. He could just watch the bass and he'd start with the chords, and then I would have to watch Joe's chords and, I'll just play leads. And the other thing is, I'm not singing, so I don't really particularly feel like strumming while someone else is singing. So Joe's already doing that, and I'll just play leads. And that's where most of that came from. So on a good chunk of these songs, and maybe all of them, if you hear a Matt Harrell song, then the leads are Philip. And Joe still plays leads on some of that, but I played leads at least a little bit on every one of his songs. And I played some leads on my own stuff too, but not nearly. The percentage is a lot lower.
So the song Life's Highway, I played the second guitar solo, and it's one of the few songs I can think of that was in a major pentatonic scale, form, shape, or key that I played out of over an A. We normally played out of minor pentatonics, it seemed like most of the time, but
Anyway, I remember coming up with this lick that that I probably got from a Stones song, or maybe somewhere else, maybe a Queen song. But anyway, I was playing in that position up here for the solo, and it sounded something like this.
Produced and polished as much. We should have given Life's Highway more attention.
My drumming was at the time it was fast. It was a lot of double rolls instead of like single stroke rolls. It was double stroke rolls where I could go across the kit. My kit was tuned a lot tighter back then than it is now, to where I could be fast, quick. I would actually play not linear beats. I would play a lot of, it was just whatever I felt.
And then Your Love Song, one of the first songs I ever wrote, and it was minor chords, interesting little chords. The lyrics are a little bit sappy, love song, like basic poetry kind of lyrics. But the chords are really interesting. C minor, and there's not a lot that I know of in C minor, but there it is, C minor and F sharp minor, and but the best part of that song and the most interesting part of that song is Matt's bass. And see, that gets back to the dynamic, the personal chemistry, the dynamic that we had of being on the same page. You'd write a song and these guys would be into it. Jason would put this cool drum part because he's digging the song and he put something cool to it. Yeah. And then Matt, bass part, he'll put something cool to it. Hey, even better. And then of course Joe's leads. And that just, it was so great. It was a great environment to, you write songs and you present a song to these guys and then they like it and then they add to it and contribute these parts to it. But Matt's bass was so good because he had this highly melodic bass and it went way up the neck and way up the scale. And like, it was just great, just melodic bass. And really, one of the most melodic bass lines I've ever heard anywhere. And then it reminded me sort of David Gilmour playing the fretless bass on Hey You, and boom, boom, and like, he had that. So that's the signature of that song for me. The best part of Your Love Song is Matt's bass part to that.
Your Love Song, this was another fun one to write to. It was a love ballad, very melodic, so I wrote something melodic to it. This one is so old, one of the very first ever, maybe first or second, that Philip wrote that we worked on. This goes so far back. It predates the drummer, so it's before Jason. This even predates Joe. He played this and I wrote the bass part to it, just him and me, and then we showed it at some point later to Joe. But I was such a novice, I was barely learning how to play. I had no idea what the chords were, didn't know what key it was in, didn't know what notes I was playing, so it was completely by ear.
Your Love Song was in C minor, and G minor.
So that's a song called Your Love Song that was on our first album, The 38th Street.
Then it would go F minor, B flat. Interesting chords, and Joe loved that kind of stuff. Back to the then its so-called chorus would kind of pick up, because that was a real slow, mellow ballad, and then it sort of pick up.
I think we recorded that that same batch of songs, probably 4 or 5 of them the first time we went in. Amanda, Tears in the Rain, Railway Blues, Your Love Song. I think all those were included, maybe even Candace's song too, on the first batch when we went in and recorded. Then came back and did the rest of the album before our Christmas break, Thanksgiving break, whatever it was.
Rock out a little bit with the... And that would be... that'd be like an A flat minor. No, major, just A flat. B flat, C minor. And then, rather than keep doing that, then it would go down to F minor, G minor, C minor. Almost out of gas, all those bar chords. But Matt's bass line was the best part of the song, sort of the signature part. He put that just ascending, descending all over the place, melodic bass line, and then Joe had these little licks and things to just put the little cherries on top where they needed to go.
But anyway, I think Matt made that song. It's a pretty soft song. There is some time changes in there. It's way more complicated than just that. Philip added some other stuff in there that, and the time changes later on in the song. But I think Matt's bass playing is really awesome on that tune. I just think it makes the song.
Especially like on Your Love Song, one of the first ones I ever wrote, Matt, the thing that stands out probably the most in that song is the bass line. Highly melodic, creative bass line.
I got criticized for it on the first album from Shane Coker's dad. Why is he not playing this straight beat? Well, because I didn't want to. I wanted to play what I thought fit the song. And what I thought fit the song was better than just playing some crappy straight beat.
Something's Wrong was the 7th song on there, and it's an early song. It was one of the first songs I wrote. It is on the pool, not the pool party. It's on the footage at Joe's house, Joe's parents' house in Burke, in the back room. And the 3 of us, it's before we had a drummer, 17 or 18, probably hadn't met Jason, no drummer, so 3 of us. And we're playing that song, and there's several aspects of that are different from how it ended up. So Something's Wrong turned out, a little bit different than originally played and envisioned. Like everything else, most of that stuff in the Sound Loft, first CD, 38th Street. This case actually doesn't say 38th Street, but most of them do.
so that's a song called Something's Wrong, and it goes back to the sunroom and in my house, and Matt and Philip coming over. I remember Philip introducing the song, and I credit Matt for the ending, coming up with the walking bass line that was really cool, that kind of changed tempos of the song.
Something's Wrong, always one of my favorites. And I loved writing bass lines to, all of the songs when somebody else writes it to put the bass. A lot of fun. But those early songs, too, really cool, because you're just learning how to play bass. But you're also writing parts to songs, so it's a fun time. So we worked on this. This goes way back. This was even predates a drummer, so this is before Jason. And me, Philip, and Joe would work on this in Joe's room in his house, and then it moved out to the sunroom you see there on the film clip. And we were all just the three of us just working that out. And Philip's got the mic there doing some guide vocals, not a lot of singing going on. But that was one of my favorites.
So Something's Wrong was, in its early form, at Joe's house, we had a breakdown where Joe would kind of go off on the leads. And a couple different forms that it took, but one of the early forms, which wasn't real practical like in the studio, but this was way before the studio, I kind of went to an E minor, and then A minor, and he's wailing over that, and rocking out, and then sped up. And there were different variations, but the point being that there was sort of this jam out at the end, and then it took different shapes and forms a little later, and it didn't quite. By the time it got to the studio and the sound off, it wasn't quite the same type of deal. But we got to the end of that and go through your typical verses. But then at the end of Something's Wrong, then it goes into a jam and it changes tempo, feel. It's sort of, I don't even know what you would call it, except some sort of almost Latin. It's not really, but almost a Santana sound to it, where just those minors. And then Joe's playing, and he didn't quite let loose. You hear it on the CD and in the studio and sound off. He sort of tamed it and reined it in, and we sort of were a little bit disappointed because it was like Joe, in the earlier manifestations of that, he really cut loose, and then in the studio we sort of scaled it back for that. But still, that's sort of some people have said that they like that, like, oh, that's the best part, or I really like that ending. And I think it was Lindsay, who Joe's now married to, and he met her and started dating her several years after Revolver. But she heard that he played it for her or something, and she said she really liked it. I'm not 100% sure. I hope I'm getting this right. If it's not, if it's somebody else, sorry, Lindsay. But I'm pretty sure it was Lindsay, and she liked that ending of Something's Wrong because it shifted to a different kind of style, and then the "You look like there's something wrong. What went wrong is my baby's." That was sort of a latter addition. That really wasn't in the earlier kind of stuff, and sometimes I kind of wish I hadn't put that in there. But it just, in the studio, you think you kind of need to throw that on, and I maybe because Joe sort of scaled back the leads, it seemed like it needed an extra little bit there. But earlier versions he rocked out. He should have kept rocking out in the studio, but he just had some nice little licks. They weren't bad, but didn't rock out quite as much.
Some of the chords that stand out in this, C is the key it's in, A minor, and then Philip goes to a D, which is rather interesting because a lot of times in the key of C you might think D minor, but he goes to a D chord, and then a pretty fast flurry of chords. So, pretty chordy song. And there was some sections after the chorus that were interesting, where he went to this D minor with this little kind of, I guess you might say, a lick riff thing going on. And then Matt had a really cool bass line that would bring us back into C. So that's interesting chords, going D minor to E. And then the progression at the end of the song I thought was pretty interesting too.
Then Something's Wrong, old song, I went back and I was playing my Rickenbacker, my dearly beloved Rickenbacker dream guitar, and that's what I played on all of these basic tracks, so it's electric rhythm guitar. But then on some of these we went back and overdubbed, and I used Joe's acoustic, that Washburn acoustic, and I put those little licks. I did that, and that overdub was really good, beefed it up a lot. And Something's Wrong was sort of vague references to various things, and that's what you do a lot of times as a songwriter, and Matt's kind of mentioned this before, where you as songwriting, you're sort of pulling in from various things, what you see and hear and your experiences, and it can be old stuff, but it can also be especially recent stuff, and you're just pulling it in and absorbing stuff, and then it comes out as you're sitting down to play, that sort of thing. And so Something's Wrong is sort of, there's like I'm dying to find the years I left behind, I'm losing my mind since you let me down. And there's several things like that, like spring is in the air, fall is coming, and it's just pulling in things and putting them out over your chords.
So Joe has credited Matt and his walking bass part for creating the ending here. As you can see from the sunroom footage in Burke, the rhythm guitar is controlling the tempo, and that speeds it up and slows it down. And as a byproduct of that, Matt comes up with his catchy bass line, memorable bass line, also called the walking bass, and really complements that part, but he didn't originate the part.
Something's Wrong was the third last track on the song, because you have Something's Wrong, Railway Blues, The Winds Have Changed, 9 tracks. I'd make it number 7. It was an early number, and you can see us on video, some of the rare video that exists of the original Revolver, or any Revolver for that matter. We're in the sunroom at Joe's parents' house in Burke, and we're jamming to that, and each take gets better, and it has more of a bluesy feel, and Joe really lets loose on leads at the end of that. And then he didn't do that, and for whatever reason in the Sound Loft, he didn't do that. He didn't play really any leads to speak of on that song, just licks, just a few, some subtle licks towards the end and throughout. That's about it. I don't know why. I've probably tried to ask him about that before. I don't really recall what he said. It just didn't happen. And it's kind of a shame, because I prefer that kind of breakdown at the end and then those wailing blues licks. And also the tempo, it was a little too fast and rushed on the final version. A little bit slower, and it had a really driving acoustic rhythm. And that's missing on the final CD. And the vocals aren't as strong because, again, teenage kid in the studio, inexperience,
the very end of Something's Wrong, I was doing this comping rhythm, and the bass was walking, and Jason was playing more of a shuffle beat, and I tried to play some fills in between the chords. I'd always kind of hoped that that was one of the things I could have overdubbed, was a rhythm doing that comping rhythm throughout, and it would have made it easier to play soloing over, but as it worked out, I was trying to play this and try to play some leads over it. So that made it kind of hard to do, and it just didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. But you had to kind of work with what you had. I always kind of felt like this song at the end really reminded me of something the Doors might have done.
And really the only one that we wrote all together was Railway Blues, and that was on the first album. And Railway Blues, we all kind of, we were sitting around in the tax office jamming, and it was just kind of an idea of, hey, let's all write a song. Let's jam to something and we'll all just kind of make something up. That's really, there was a lot of collaborative efforts, but that was really the one and only where everybody had a bit. And so all four of us really wrote that.
Matt and I wrote most of the words. I came up with the chorus theme of Railway Blues. She's a runaway train with nothing to lose, 100 miles ahead of nothing but railway blues, and I came up with that as sort of the theme, but there was help from Matt and even Jason and Joe to a lesser degree, of course, but they pitched in with the theme and the idea of the train and this story unfolding on a train and, a guy and a girl. Everybody kind of pitched in on that, but I came up with the theme and Matt came up with verses, and I came up with some verses too, but we sort of riffed back and forth, alternated.
I know Tax Office, we wrote Railway Blues.
Railway Blues, for sure, was a full band project. One night, I don't even know how it came about, but
sort of out of the frustration and boredom of your stalling in between songs. We just finished a song and we're kind of goofing around and time's ticking and you get antsy, and especially when you're a teenager and all that, and you're in a room with people, you get antsy, and you can only wait so long before somebody's going to hit a chord, or somebody's going to pluck some notes, or somebody's going to... There's always noise and commotion, and that always sort of added to our little tussles with each other, too. Now, get off that bass, we're trying to talk here. There's always that kind of nervous energy, noise creation. And there was that downtime in between songs, and Joe just sort of out of frustration, he just starts going into the da 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 da, and then the fives and sixes, and Jason, and he puts his beat, and it may sound like a simple thing to Jason put a drum beat to it, but that's part of why he's on the credits. How we listed it was, P. Harrell, M. Harrell, J. Harris, and J. Riley. I mean, we're all on there for what it's worth. But he's on there because if Jason doesn't jump in with those drums to complement Joe's chords that he's kicking out like that, this spontaneous thing, and then Jason's right there with him, that really launched it. So then Matt and I jump in, and I start playing what Joe's playing, and Matt's on the bass, and then, okay, we gotta have words, and then we start coming up with words. And so it was a group effort. It's the only group effort that we had, but it's special.
Joe and Philip musically came up with the old rock style chord progression and kind of the tempos with what we had in mind, kind of an old fashioned rocker, but fast, upbeat, almost kind of like a Taking Care of Business, or maybe even an older, but fast, and we're just gonna have a rocker.
But really, it started with Joe and Jason. So musically, it started with those guys because Joe started coming up with some Chuck Berry style things on guitar, old school, right up there in C and F, and I can't quite remember who came up with the B flat, departure to B flat. It could have been Joe, could have been me, could have been Matt, and then of course, so Joe starts that off.
Railway blues. When you take something, you start it off with a groove, and then next thing you know, you're writing lyrics to it, and before you know it, you have one of our popular songs written within a night. Just messing around, that's magic.
Speaking of Railway Blues, that's the only song on the album that all of us worked on together, as far as I can remember, that it being written in a practice. I remember having the little chord structure, which was just a 1-4-5, and we later kind of changed that structure to fit where the lyrics were going and where the chorus went in the song, and changed it up a bit to where it wasn't like a quite your typical 1-4-5 progression like a blues song, but definitely old rock and roller. I know as far as my part goes on guitar, there's a lot of Chuck Berry-isms and old rock and roll licks through the whole song, and Matt and Philip were the main people on the lyrics and singing, of course, on that song. And I don't really remember how much I chimed in on something maybe, or Jason on a part here and there, but mostly we were kind of coming up with the musical arrangement, and while they were putting lyrics to it that I can remember.
Baseline for Railway Blues, not all that interesting, just a straightforward driving bass, old style rocker, so something like.
So another great guitar that I was able to use on our first album was an Epiphone Casino, and unfortunately I sold that guitar, but I was able to get another one, and probably my favorite song that I used it on was called Railway Blues, which was just a typical 1-4-5 blues progression, but we actually changed it a bit and made it a little bit more interesting by doing that. But this is how the intro would have sounded.
I don't remember all the exact stuff, and on some of these I do remember specifics, but on this one, the details aren't there, but he might have, for example, Matt might have come up with the first line of, she hopped a train from Southern California. Could have been me, could have been Matt. I lean towards Matt on that one, but I remember some specifics that I came up with, like, she's got a piece of broken hearts from every town. Didn't mean to let that little baby get me down. That was mine. She can outrun it all, accept her reputation, straight to the point, without insinuation. That was mine. Chugging down the tracks and building up the steam. You better watch your back, if you know what I mean. That was mine. But I think Matt might have come up with the opening line, hopped a train to Southern California. And then, I had the chorus and all that. There had to have been another line that Matt put in there, but all of us really kind of pitched in, at least conceptually, to that.
Philip and I wrote the lyrics mainly, and he came up with the hook, Railway Blues. It was sort of like, kind of like an old train song or whatnot, but he came up with that idea, and it's like, well, let's build the song around that. So other than the hook he came up with, we kind of almost split the lyrics, almost kind of back and forth. One of us would come up with a line, the other would write the other part to it, or maybe a verse, and then the other guy did another verse, maybe 60-40 him, but it was really me and him lyrically. Jason threw in a line or two, and like I said, Joe and Philip mainly musically, but that was fun. That was a good jam song. I think that ended the first album. That was the last song on the first album.
Railway Blues, which is the 8th track, second to last track on the CD, as a group effort.
And that was a popular one too. That was a good crowd pleaser. Everybody liked that. Joe would tear it up on leads, and so that was a fun one to play.
I was going to point out on the guitar solo, or some of the solos, I was playing at Epiphone Casino, not this guitar, but one similar. It was a casino anyway. And I had really heavy gauge strings. Matter of fact, they were crazy heavy, considering. I had an 11 on top, which is the high E strings. It was an 11 gauge string. And that would make it really difficult to bend, especially if you were playing anything outside of the first and second string. So some of my phrasings on Railway Blues was a little different than what I generally might have played, or like what some people would have played. Almost had to play stuff like you would, were back in the 50s or 60s, playing with heavy gauge strings on your instrument. So here's a phrase that is in the first solo where I actually had to do a little Chuck Berryism. There's a lot of Chuck Berry influence in Railway Blues for me. I played a lot of double stops. And the first solo, or at least parts of the first solo, I'll give you the example of what I'm talking about. Here's the first little part, this double stop. That phrase, and then here's the bend that I wasn't able to do, or was hard to do. An idea something like that. Whereas now with the lighter gauge strings, it's a lot easier to bend. So it's funny how when you're starting out playing and you don't realize these things. Later on, I got a Fender Stratocaster when we went into the studio at the Sound Loft, about halfway through us doing some of those songs. And I thought it was so easy to play compared to the casino because of the string gauge. So I went from playing 11s on top to a 9 on top, and much easier to play and bend, and it was like a new world. And the casino kind of got shelved after that, and that's why I didn't really use it anymore in the next album and got rid of the guitar one in general. But anyway, fun times.
And we went on to play that for years. We would play that song in Brother Sharp, but not a true original for Brother Sharp. It's more like Brother Sharp was covering a Revolver original. We did that for years, and then later my band in the 2007, 2008, and part of 2009, Under the Gun, we did that song in Under the Gun too. it's a relatively simple song, driving, up tempo, and it's really playable. You know, just a good number to throw in gigs and venues and stuff. And all the combination of people that we've been associated with in other bands, and people that have filled in Brother Sharp in various bands, like everybody knows that song, they've heard it, and they know how to play it, and it's a real versatile song to plug in there. But it's been played a lot more so than any of these songs on down the road.
It's so much now. I didn't really back then. You know, I played drum kits for years before that, but I didn't understand, you know, patterns and cues and all that stuff. It was just what I felt. It's how I played. So I played how I felt. It was instinctive. These days, it's all about grooves and patterns, and linear patterns and grooves, and you know, cueing the back out of a chorus into a verse type deal. But which is stuff that I didn't learn until I actually played live with Brother Sharp years later.
So our impression...
Brother Sharp and Under the Gun.
A phone call from my dad, you know, after he heard it, the album, and he liked it. So on the phone with Dad, you know, we're talking about it, and then he's you know, that one song on there, it's he's talking about Railway Blues. That one's it sounds kind of suggestive, and I just laughed. I mean, I didn't even reply or anything like that. But that always cracks me up thinking back. You know, just laughed. It's like I didn't say anything, but it was just kind of understood. It's like, you know, it's rock and roll.
So the Winds Have Changed was another one that started off in G. G, D, A minor, E minor. That was the main hook, and that was the verse chords. But it was about the rhythm. More so than just the chords, it was a driving rhythm.
Like the Winds Have Changed, for instance, in that I'm using scales, but sort of going descending to ascending. So I would play one ascending and then come back around to the next verse, same chord progression, flip it and do descending.
And so forth. So then you'd have a little change, so you could go into the chorus and it would be A minor to D a couple of times. Jason just kind of holding the beat. Then you'd go into the chorus, which was a G. So, and we needed a build up, which we could never do. But if we could ever sit down and practice that and rehearse it, that would that last little hanging D would then need a drum roll. I can't stop the winds of change, go through time like a hurricane. And then you'd have the chorus chords, which were obviously G, D, very similar to the verse. But then you skip the E minor and go back to D. So then in the chorus you need another little break, and so another one of the A minor to D, A minor, D. Then, because we liked multiple parts back then, I don't think I can write like that anymore. It's hard enough to come up with one or two, and some songs you can get away with a verse and a chorus, or sometimes even just a verse or just a chorus. But you know, 2-part songs aren't too bad, but then it's best to have a 3-part verse, chorus, and some kind of bridge. But then you get really fancy with a 4-part verse, chorus, bridge, interludes, and which this had, and then you could do verse, chorus, bridge, interlude, and then like a second bridge, and have 5 parts. And I think this has 5 parts. It's so anyway, after that you have the long-haired girl second bridge, or whatever you want to call it, the she's long-haired girl. So you throw in that minor with the D, whole D, and then go long-haired girl. That was awful. And then you go back to the verses. Now, I said it was 5 parts. You get the verses, make 1. You get the chorus, makes 2, obviously. And then you got the little breaks, make 3. Then you've got the minor part, makes 4. And then I suppose that would make the 5th part would be that intro, because it had a completely different intro that built up a long intro that, if I can even remember what. That's it. These echo effects and flange effects and things like that. And I had Pink Floyd in mind when I did that, because I love those. Another Brick in the Wall and so many of their other songs that had those effects, and it sounded so eerie and innovative. And so I had that in mind, and I'm not going to claim it sounds like Pink Floyd. I should be so lucky, but that's what I was definitely kind of going for, or at least had in mind. It went into, I guess, the 6th part. That intro built into then you'd come into the verses.
The winds have changed. This was a epic anthem and good fast hard rocker. This was a crowd pleaser. We jam on live. People loved it. I tried to, when I wrote the part for it, I tried to and did alternate between ascending and descending parts.
And then The Winds of Change was a rocker. Railway Blues gets all the credit for being the rocker. Just an old school rock and roll number, driving rock and roll song. But The Winds of Change was probably the bigger hitter, and it just didn't come out the way it should have. And a lot of that had to do with timing issues, because it was such a complicated song, starts and stops, and Jason hadn't fully mastered it. He did admirably, considering, but he didn't totally know when to stop and come in and all that. And unless you're a musical expert, you're not really going to notice that. But if you have an ear for it, and especially hearing this, go back, listen, you can tell the drummer's kind of trying to feel his way through it instead of having it down 100%. But like I said, he did admirably, considering. The other thing is the vocals are kind of weak because it was a little bit high, and I never, amazingly, some of this stuff is just, it's like a no-brainer at this point, but it wasn't back then. Like, I didn't warm up for vocals, you just drive to the studio and get in, and you just start, there's no warm-up, there's not a lot of practice, and I didn't stretch out my vocals enough. I feel like now I can sing those high notes, or I could have a few years ago. I don't hardly sing anymore, but so those high notes were a problem, and some of the lyrics needed to be tightened up and cleaned up a little bit, and the structure, like I said, not everybody and not just Jason, not everybody knew where I was going all the time. You know, it was easy to kind of snooze and catch people napping on those, and, you know, no, we're into the chorus now. It's in G, just like the verse is in G, that sort of thing. So it was kind of loose and shaky, needed to be tightened up and everything, but it was, at its core, it was the big heavy hitter of the whole album. And you know, we rocked out on that at some parties and things, and people always seemed to dig it. And I always felt like it could have been a great song, but it just missed the mark. It just never lived up to what it could have been and should have been.
So the very last song on 38th Street was called The Winds Have Changed. And Philip had this really awesome intro, kind of almost Pink Floyd sounding to me. And it was just guitar and drums. And then we came in later and the song picked up and kind of changed tempos even. And there was a couple parts in this song that had some tempo changes that made it really tricky to play. And I remember us working on it quite a bit and playing it in the studio.
Aside from those weaknesses, it was a great song. It was a jam, and it really rocked, and had some lead solos that I put on there at the beginning and the end. I mean, I pretty much played, and Joe had a few lead licks in between vocal lines, but I played most of that lead guitar, and we rocked out, and it was just a rocker, but it could have been really good. It could have been great. Instead, it was pretty good. But we played that at the pool party before we ever had vocals, and it's on the tape that survived all these years, and we're and then, I mean, it beat, good driving beat, rockin' chords, and all that kind of stuff, but it was still a good way to cap off the album, kind of the final piece to that album, go out with a bang. It's arguably the biggest rocker, either that or Railway Blues, and those are the last two songs on there. But you got driving, good old-fashioned rock and roll Railway Blues, and then you've got a little bit more modern take on the rocker. So that sort of sums up 38th Street.
The chords went something like this. Anyway, so I didn't have too many interesting parts in this song. I really credit Philip's, I guess, ability to come up with the different hooks in it and time signature changes that made it really interesting. Matt had a pretty cool bass line, and of course Jason had some key parts in it. But it was the last song that I think we might have recorded at the Sound Loft. Could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it was. I know I was playing my Fender Strat, and too bad I didn't have one of these back in those days.
Just let Okay. What can I say to try to pull you